Berlin is one of the few cities in the world that experienced such extreme changes in such a short time. For decades, a wall crossed streets, neighborhoods, and even houses, separating families, friends, and neighbors practically overnight. What today seems impossible happened abruptly and deeply, transformed the lives of millions of people. Even so, despite this dramatic past, the city managed to reinvent itself in ways few imagined. More than just the capital of Germany, Berlin is a place where history, culture, and everyday behavior blend in a very particular way. Wars, political divisions, and long processes of reconstruction left visible marks on the city and on the way Berliners live today. By observing daily life more closely, small details, habits, and signs scattered throughout the city begin to appear, revealing deep stories, many of them connected to one of the most striking events of modern Europe. In the early hours of August 12 to 13, 1961, soldiers began stretching barbed wire across the streets of Berlin. Within a few hours, entire neighborhoods were divided. People who had gone to sleep in one city woke up in two. On one side, West Berlin. On the other, East Berlin, controlled by the Soviet Union. In some places, the wall literally ran through the middle of the street, separating families, neighbors, and even house doors. During the nearly 28 years that the Berlin Wall existed, thousands of people tried to escape from the eastern side of the city. It is estimated that more than 5,000 managed to cross to the western side using tunnels, fake documents, modified cars, and even improvised balloons. But not everyone succeeded. Approximately 140 people died trying to cross the border, which turned the wall into one of the most dramatic symbols of the Cold War. Among the many escape stories from East Berlin, some seem straight out of a movie. One of the most famous involves an apparently ordinary car, a Volkswagen Beetle. Mechanics adapted the engine compartment to create a small space where a person could hide. In one of the boldest attempts, an entire family managed to cross the border hidden this way, fooling the guards who inspected the vehicles. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, the city had to deal with a curious reality. For almost 3 decades, there had been 2 completely separate Berlins. This meant 2 administrations, 2 transportation networks, 2 zoos, and even sports clubs representing opposite sides of the city. Integrating all of this took years of planning and adaptation, and some of these contrasts can still be noticed in different neighborhoods today. Even decades after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the city maintains subtle marks that reveal where it once stood. In several parts of the German capital, a line of cobblestones on the ground follows exactly the route of the former division. Walking through Berlin, it is possible to see this line crossing streets, sidewalks, and squares, reminding visitors that a border once existed there that separated people and stories for nearly 3 decades. Berlin also became famous for a very particular type of nightlife. The Berghain Club, considered one of the most influential in the world, opens on Friday night and can remain operating until Monday morning without interruption. The experience begins in the line, which sometimes lasts for hours, and there is a curious detail. The doorman decides who enters, often rejecting people who look too much like tourists. Even as the capital of one of the largest economies on the planet, Berlin has always had a relatively lower cost of living than other European capitals. For decades, this attracted artists, musicians, filmmakers, and creative people looking for space to experiment with ideas. Many neighborhoods in the city eventually transformed into alternative cultural centers, and this mixture of heavy history with modern creativity helped shape Berlin's unique identity. Another curious detail of everyday life in Berlin is the city's relationship with bicycles. It is estimated that more than 2 million bikes circulate through the streets, often surpassing the number of cars in several neighborhoods. Respect for cyclists is taken very seriously. Opening a car door and causing an accident with a cyclist can be considered a serious offense. For visitors, this dynamic completely changes the way people move around the city. Despite its urban and historical image, Berlin is surprisingly green. Approximately 1/3 of the city is made up of parks, urban forests, and lakes spread across different neighborhoods. This means Berlin has more green space per resident than any other European capital. In summer, many residents spend the day in these parks as if they were urban beaches, a habit that reveals another side of the city that many tourists do not imagine. Anyone walking through Berlin quickly notices a recurring joke among residents. They say the true symbol of the city is not the famous Brandenburg Gate, but construction cranes. That is because Berlin always seems to be transforming. Buildings are restored, neighborhoods are renewed, and new urban areas emerge constantly, reflecting a city that is still reinventing itself after decades of destruction and division. During World War II, Berlin became one of the main targets of Allied bombings. Throughout the conflict, the city was attacked more than 360 times, leaving entire neighborhoods destroyed. When the war ended, the amount of rubble was so enormous that it took about 15 years just to remove the accumulated debris. The reconstruction of the city was not only architectural, it also redefined the identity of the German capital. The destruction of the war even affected unexpected places in the city. The Berlin Zoo, one of the oldest and most important in the world, suffered enormous damage during the bombings. Of the 3,715 animals that lived there before the war, only 91 survived. Among them was a hippopotamus named Knautschke, who eventually became a kind of symbol of the city's reconstruction in the following years. Beneath the modern streets of Berlin, there is another hidden city. During World War II and the Cold War, numerous bunkers, escape tunnels, and underground structures were built for protection and transportation. Some of these spaces remain practically untouched since 1945, with objects, equipment, and even military vehicles preserved. This underground network reveals that the history of the city is not only on the streets, but also beneath them. Walking along the sidewalks of Berlin, it is common to notice small golden plaques embedded in the ground. They are part of a project called Stolperstein, or stumbling stones created to remember victims of Nazism. Each plaque is placed in front of the last known residence of a person deported or murdered during the regime. Today there are more than 100,000 spread across Europe, and Berlin has one of the largest concentrations. A curious detail of Berlin's visual culture appears in the pedestrian traffic lights themselves. The Ampelmännchen, the small hat-wearing figure used in traffic signals in former East Germany, almost disappeared after the reunification of the country. The plan was to replace it with the Western model, but residents protested so strongly against the change that the character was preserved, and eventually became a cultural and tourist symbol of the city. One curiosity that surprises many visitors is Berlin's relaxed relationship with alcohol consumption. Unlike many large cities around the world, it is completely legal to drink beer in public spaces. People often walk through the streets with bottles, sit in parks, or even drink on the subway without it being considered a problem. This habit is part of the local culture and reveals a very different urban lifestyle compared to other capitals. Another curious aspect of Berlin's culture is the strong Turkish influence in the city. The German capital hosts the largest Turkish community outside Turkey, with more than 200,000 people living mainly in neighborhoods such as Kreuzberg. This presence deeply influenced the local cuisine. In fact, the famous doner kebab, served in bread, as we know it today, was popularized in Berlin in the 1970s. In the 1990s, Oranienburger Straße became known for a curious phenomenon. The street had a large number of public telephones, which began to be used by sex workers as a contact point with clients. Over time, the location became associated with this type of activity, which led authorities to create specific rules to organize and control the situation. Some of these regulations still influence the area today. Many people associate the name Berlin with the bear that appears on the city's coat of arms. The animal has been present in the official symbol for more than 700 years and became a cultural icon spread through monuments and sculptures. But there is a curious detail. Linguists believe the name Berlin probably comes from an ancient Slavic word meaning swamp. In other words, the famous bear may just be a historical coincidence. One of the most famous remaining sections of the Berlin Wall still stands along the banks of the Spree River. This stretch became known as the East Side Gallery, but interestingly it was not created as a traditional museum. Soon after the fall of the wall in 1990, artists from 21 countries were invited to transform the concrete into an open-air art gallery, creating murals that symbolize freedom and change. One of the most interesting things about Berlin is how each neighborhood seems to have its own personality. Prenzlauer Berg has charming cafes and streets that resemble European bohemian districts. Kreuzberg is known for its alternative, multicultural and artistic scene. Charlottenburg, on the other hand, has a more classic and elegant atmosphere. Walking through the city sometimes gives the feeling of visiting several different cities within one. Berlin also has a strong connection with cinema and television. The city has served as the setting for numerous international productions and famous series. Nearby is Babelsberg Studio, considered the oldest film studio in the world still in operation. Founded even before the emergence of Hollywood, it helped consolidate Berlin as an important cultural and creative center in Europe. Berlin is also one of the cities richest in culture and history in Europe. The German capital has more than 170 official museums spread across the city, a number greater than the days of the year. Among them is the famous Museum Island, a complex of 5 major museums located on the Spree River and recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, bringing together some of the most important historical collections on the continent. Berlin is a city that went through something few cities in the world have experienced. It was destroyed, divided, rebuilt, and reinvented several times throughout history. And perhaps that is exactly why it has such a unique identity. Every part of the city carries a memory, a street where a wall once stood, a building rebuilt after the war, a neighborhood that became a cultural center. When you visit Berlin understanding these stories, you realize that the city is not just a tourist destination, it is practically an open book about how societies change, adapt, and keep moving forward. If you enjoyed these curiosities about Berlin, comment below which of these facts surprised you the most. And if you want to see curiosities about another city or country, write it in the comments. The next video might be exactly the place you suggest.